in a move to address concerns over South Africa's captive lion industry, Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs Minister Dr. Dion George is seeking public input on proposed regulations to restrict activities involving African lions. And with around 8,000 captive lions, the country faces global criticism over conservation, ethics, as well as regulation. Let's further expand on this topic with the Minister himself, Dr. Dion George, who joins us now. Minister, thank you so much for joining us. Great having you with us on the show today. Let's start by unpacking some of the key concerns about the country's captive lion industry that has led you to now seek public input on this matter. Worth noting also, Doctor, that South Africa is in fact currently the only country with an extensive captive lion sector.
Yes, indeed, that is so. And what the concern is, and it's been that way for a long time, is we've got the lion bone industry, where lions are held in captivity specifically for the purpose of using their carcasses and their bones and their parts that are then exported for use specifically in the Far East. Now, that is an unacceptable practice. It brings South Africa into very bad light. And it's not something that we want to do with our majestic African lions. So that is something that is completely unacceptable and it needs to end. Then we've also got what is so-called hunting, what is called the captive lion hunting. Now, what these individuals are doing is not hunting. They're certainly not hunting. So it's very important that we get an end to that. It's been going on for a very long time, and government has tried previously to get this to end unsuccessfully, but I do believe we've now made sufficient progress. This is a culmination of a 6-year process to get to the point where we are today. And when I got appointed as the minister in July, I made it crystal clear that I have every intention of continuing with that process to stop the captive lion industry, where we have this bone trade and where we have this so-called hunting. It is unacceptable and it needs to end.
And Minister, when you speak about being portrayed in bad light, I mean, does this also then include the commercial captive lion breeding industry, which has been labeled, as you've said, cruel and controversial by some who say that the industry actually creates a misleading impression that lions are abundant and thriving, since the captive ones are actually more than the wild ones?
Well, the fact is that there are sufficient lions in the wild. For example, if you look at Kruger National Park, we do not have a shortage of lions. So it is untrue that the lions that are held in captivity are in fact somehow saving the species. That is not so. Also, we must bear in mind the context that we work in. Now, there's a very strong feeling and view that the holding and the capture and the keeping of the African lion in captivity is an un-African practice. That is not a thing that's been done. So that is another element that we need to take into consideration. Yes, it is true that there are a very large number of lions in captivity. They cannot be put back into the wild because they now have a different genetic makeup because of what has happened. They've been in captivity, there's been inbreeding. So, for example, what happens in the lion bone industry is those lions are so severely compromised that many of them are lame, many of them are in pain, and that's how they spend their lives. Now, nobody believes that that is acceptable. Only the people who make a lot of money from it. And because what happens also is when those bones are taken abroad, they are masqueraded as tiger bones, because a lion bone and a tiger bone is similar. And of course, tigers, you can't do that with, and there's a huge shortage of tigers. So that's what's happening to our African lion. And we as the custodians cannot have that. And certainly me as a minister, I will not have that. That is for certain. And that is why that particular practice must end.
Minister, let's further expand on that. I mean, you bring an interesting dimension here of the illicit trade of those lion parts. Who exactly are these culprits, and how are you putting plans afoot to stop them from this illegal practice?
Well, we do have collaborations with other countries in the world, and we work together. So, for example, we recently had an interregional congress on the illicit trafficking of wildlife, and we've had a number of conversations with our counterparts in Asia, also in the US and the UK and the European Union, etc. But as we know, South Africa battles often with implementation. So we have very good plans, etc. But actually stopping the trade is hard because, yes, it is possible for us to catch some of the people doing it, but not all of it. Also, what happens is, for example, it's not only in the lion bone trade. We've got the poaching with the rhinos. We've seen recently the massacre of rhino for a tiny stub of horn at Hlahluwe in Folozi. That's what we have. We've got abalone poaching as well. And that is a criminal syndicate, as is the lion bone industry. So what you have to do is you've got to interrupt those criminal syndicates through law enforcement, but then you've got to go back to the root. And here, if we go, for example, if we look at the lion bone industry, if we go to the root is that there are these operators who have these lions in captivity that are treating them in this way. We need to stop that. It is voluntary, of course, because they need to register. We've given them 120 days to register voluntarily, and then there will be an acquisition process so that these bones can then be disposed of. Mm-hmm. And that is the way that we're going to go. So it is a process. As I mentioned, this process has been going on for a while. My predecessor spent a lot of time lining up a lot of the work that needed to be done in terms of consultation, because as we know, we have a very strong and wonderful constitution, and it requires us to do lots and lots of consultation. So there's been a lot of it, and this is the culmination. And as I said before, is that I have committed from the outset that I will not interrupt that process, because it is something that needs to happen, and it is good for South Africa. Because if we're going to be an honorable member of the conservation world and all eyes are on us, we can't have this kind of practices. And if we do, we can't just sit back and do nothing about it, because that is completely unacceptable.
All right, Minister, we're out of time. Just very quickly, for this drive, where can people, those that are interested, actually take part and make their submissions?
Well, we have issued a proclamation. A government gazette's now been issued. It's got all the details on it. So for people who want to surrender the lion bones, there is an address they can write to, and then there will be an interaction. And I will develop a process once we've got closer to the 120 days. And then, of course, on the new facilities, well, obviously the prohibition already started, because as soon as it was proclamated. But there is a process now for people to write in. They've got 30 days to say what they feel about it, and then there will be a process. But it's on, as you can see, we're very serious about it, because now as a country, we're ready to move.
Minister, thank you so much for your input this afternoon. Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs there, Dr. Dion George.